A few hundred miles away, in the approximate center of the Persian Gulf, the nuclear-powered submarine, USS Georgia, was plowing along the surface of the dark water, its antenna array rotating atop the conning tower. Inside the sub's radar room, all hell had broken loose. A loud klaxon alarm was blaring, triggered by unusual readings on the radar scopes. Jittery crewmen, who'd been sleeping only moments before, poured through the bulkheads to their combat stations. The sub's commander, Admiral J.C. Kern, stepped through the forward hatch and yelled over the noise for a report. "Ensign, status!" A sailor wearing a headset wheeled around in his chair. "Sir, we have a total radar blackout over a 17-kilometer area." The Admiral moved to the main radar map and studied the incoming signal. A large portion of the upper screen was blank, but it was obviously not an equipment failure because the blank ellipse on the screen was moving. "Admiral," one of his officers stepped closer. "I've ordered a complete diagnostic run. The auxiliary radar units—" "Sir?" "Excuse me, sir," shouted another sailor from the opposite side of the cramped room. "Radar may be malfunctioning, but infrared is totally off the map. No reading at all." He pushed away from his monitor to give Kern a view of the infrared tracking system. The entire screen was a bright pool of red light. "Lieutenant," Kern barked, almost amused at the chaos. "Yes, sir?" "Get Atlantic Command on the line." The Oval Office was crowded with military leaders and the president's advisors. 30 phone calls were taking place at once, but the noise level stayed at a hushed murmur. Extra tables had been carried in, and there was a constant stream of foot traffic in and out of the room. The Joint Chiefs had arrived an hour earlier, having recalled the nation's armed forces. The fleet of nuclear submarines was maintaining launch readiness, and battleships were deployed along both coasts. Civilian advisors had taken over the sofas, and the president sat under the north windows behind Resolute, the impressive desk given to Teddy Roosevelt by the Queen of England. There were also representatives from the Atlantic Command, NATO, and military attachés from the British, Russian, and German consulates. This impressive collection of decision-makers, one of the most powerful groups ever to assemble at the White House, had adopted a wait-and-see attitude. Many of them had advocated a preemptive strike against the object lurking behind the moon. NASA engineers had been consulted as to the feasibility of sending the space shuttle to attack with nuclear weapons, but for many reasons, they had eventually arrived at an uneasy consensus not to do so. They waited tensely for the 36 segments to enter the Earth's atmosphere. When the line from the Pentagon rang, all the major players in the room fell silent. General Gray, as commander of the Joint Chiefs, stepped forward to answer the call. "This is Gray," he growled into the receiver, his face as expressive as chiseled stone. "Where in the Pacific?" he asked. After listening for a moment, he turned to the president. "They've spotted 2 coming in over the west coast, both over California." "Send the plane from Moffett Field," Whitmore ordered. The plan had already been set in motion. An AWACS aircraft from the facility near San Jose was already in the air, waiting for the order to begin a close-up inspection of the incoming craft. The door flew open and Connie marched toward the president's desk. "CNN is doing a live shot from Russia. They've got a picture of this thing." "Put it on," Whitmore said, glancing at Lermontov, the worried Russian ambassador. One of the staffers pulled open the armoire doors and switched on the television. The broadcast was coming live from Novomoskos, an industrial town 200 miles south of the Russian capital. A local reporter stood at the edge of a wide boulevard which ran through the city's most fashionable neighborhood, shouting over the mayhem that surrounded him. Although it was just past 6 in the morning, the street was choked with panicked residents, running headlong in every direction. Cars sped past the camera, swerving to avoid pedestrians. The reporter's words were being translated by someone in CNN's Atlanta studio. Sightings of this atmospheric phenomenon have been reported here in Novomoskos and other parts of Russia. Again, this phenomenon is moving too slowly to be a comet or a meteor. Astronomers can't explain this baffling occurrence. The camera then panned away from the reporter and upward. In the distance, it showed the grainy image of a fireball hanging in the early morning sky. As the camera zoomed in, the flame-spitting giant filled the screen, towers of fire erupting in all directions as the surface of the spreading object moved against the sky, its friction burning up huge amounts of oxygen. Everyone in the Oval Office stared at the television, grimly transfixed by the strange spectacle. The boiling cloud of fire looked like God announcing himself in an old Charlton Heston movie. As you can see from our live picture, one of the CNN anchors broke in, a sense of panic has gripped the people of Novomoskos. We have learned this same type of reaction is happening in all parts of the city. The Russian equivalent of the Red Cross reports there have already been scores of injuries, most of them traffic-related, as citizens scramble to get as far away from this strange phenomenon as possible. The situation is even worse in Moscow, where the craft is thought to be headed. "Mr. President," General Gray interrupted, "our AWACS from Moffett Field has an ETA of 3 minutes with the contact point. We can put a line from the cockpit through this phone. Put it on the speakerphone." Whitmore saw no reason for the others not to hear the report. Worried faces gathered in a rough circle around the president's desk, looking at the phone and one another as sounds from the AWACS's cockpit were radioed to the Oval Office, 3,000 miles away. The plane was flying south several miles off the California coastline. The AWACS, Airborne Warning and Control System, was capable of scanning a 400-mile area and tracking 500 enemy planes simultaneously. But the state-of-the-art radar system, like so many of the Earth's communication systems, was malfunctioning. The calm, professional voices of the aircraft's crew came murmuring over the phone line. "Radar 2, I'm drawing a blank. Forward radar doesn't see a thing, and side radar is impaired. What's your status? Over?" "Absolutely correct, sir. Forward radar is totally gone. We're flying IMC blind. Over." Inside, the aircraft was packed with wall-to-wall computers, instrument banks, radar scopes, and other intelligence-gathering equipment. Technicians in headsets in orange jumpsuits were talking frantically to one another, trying one experiment after another, racing to adjust the navigation systems. "Little Pitcher," a voice came over the radio. "We're tracking you down here at Fort Ord, and you're looking all clear. Are you out of those clouds yet? Over?" "Negative," replied the pilot, squinting out the front window. "We still have 0 visibility." A tropical storm had blown unusually far north from Mexico, leaving a thick mass of clouds hanging over the California coast. "Fort Ord, what's your best estimate on our ETA? Over?" "Sorry, Little Pitcher, we just lost our angle. We can't see you any longer. You're into the blackout zone on our screens. Maybe San Diego can still see you." After a tense moment of silence, a new voice came onto the line. "This is San Diego, negative on that. We've got the same problem. Little Pitcher is inside a disturbance field. Sorry, Pitcher. We'll stand by." Blasts of sunlight came through gaps in the clouds and into the cockpit, only to vanish a split second later. "Ground control, this is Pitcher. We're starting to experience general instrument malfunction. Our altimeter and environment controls are gone. We're still moving through 0 visibility and can't get any kind of reading on what's in front of us. I'm going to climb a little higher and see if we can't get clear over the top of this cloud cover." "Roger, Pitcher," came the reply from Moffett Field. "It's your call at this point. You are totally manual." "Don't climb," the president whispered. A former fighter pilot himself, he was imagining himself at the helm of the plane. "Just keep it level. but the phone hookup was a one-way transmission. "That's looking a little better," the AWACS reported with relief. "I think we've found a clearing." Growing louder, a sonic disturbance, the cracking hiss of static interference, growled over the speakerphone. Then, just as the AWACS broke free of the clouds, the pilot's voice screamed over the noise. "Jesus God, the sky's on fire!" In front of him was a solid wall of flame 5 miles high and 20 miles long, a majestic and fearsome sight. Roughly disc-shaped, it was shedding altitude, dropping down right on top of him. The pilot jerked back on the controls, forcing the plane into a steep climb. But when they came too close to the fireball, the plane suddenly shattered like a light bulb crashing against an anvil. There was a sharp crack on the speakerphone before the line in the Oval Office went dead. "Get them back," General Gray snarled to one of his men, even though he, like everyone else in the room, suspected the plane was lost. The commander-in-chief of the Atlantic Air Command stepped closer to a stunned President Whitmore. "2 more have been spotted over the Atlantic. One is moving toward New York, the other is headed in this direction." "How much time do we have?" "Less than 10 minutes, sir." With this news, Whitmore's civilian advisors began pushing their way through the ring of military men that circled his desk. The first one through was Nimziki. He spoke very precisely in a voice loud enough for the entire room to hear. "Generals, we must move the president to a safe location at once. Organize a military escort to Crystal Mountain." General Gray agreed completely. He leaned close to the president's chair and urged him to move immediately to a secure location. As orders began to fly around the room, the president reached across his desk and put a hand on Nimziki's shoulder. The gesture took the secretary quite by surprise. He froze in place, staring at the hand as if at a tarantula. President Whitmore used a moment to confer with his most trusted advisor. "Connie, what's your take? Can we expect the same kind of panic here as in Russia?" "Probably worse than what we just saw," she said. "I agree," Whitmore said. "They'll start to run before they know which way to go. We'll lose a lot of lives." Nimziki could see where the president was heading. He stepped backward out of the president's grip. "Mr. President, you can discuss these secondary matters on the way, but the situation demands that you, as the commander-in-chief—" "I'm not leaving," the president announced. Nimziki was stunned, as were most of the people in the room. Several top-ranking officers stepped closer to the president, urging him to come to his senses and evacuate to a protected location. "We must maintain a working government in a time of crisis," one of them reminded him loudly, making no attempt to disguise his frustration. A dozen men were all shouting at once, concerned for the president's safety. A pair of Secret Service agents pushed their way close and stood at his side. With a long, glaring look, the president silenced the room. Slowly, he issued a set of commands. "I want the vice president, the cabinet, and the joint chiefs taken to a secured location. Let's get you men to NORAD. For the time being, I'm going to remain here in the White House." Nimziki bristled. "Mr. President, I understand your position," Whitmore cut him off. "But I'm not going to add to a public hysteria that could cost us thousands of lives. Before we take off running, let's find out whether these things are hostile and exactly where they're headed." Nimziki stared icily back at the president. He had hoped Whitmore would be different from the other presidents he had served, that his military training would keep him cool in an emergency. Even though this was a totally new situation, there was still a protocol to be followed. But Whitmore was trying to write his own script. Nimziki still had a few aces up his sleeve, but knew it was too early to play them. "Connie," Whitmore continued, "initiate the emergency broadcasting system. I'll do an announcement as soon as you can get it set up. Write a brief speech advising people not to panic, to stay home if possible. Can you do that in 20 minutes? "Give me 10, she said, already on her way out the door. The Joint Chiefs were still standing in the office, confused, not quite willing to leave their posts here in what had become the command center. "All right, people, let's move," Whitmore commanded. "I want you to get to NORAD as quickly as possible." The 6 generals exchanged glances with their staffers, then began moving reluctantly toward the exits. General Gray broke away from the pack and stood in front of Whitmore. "With your permission, Mr. President, I'd like to remain by your side." As chairman of the Joint Chiefs, it was an unusual request, but given the long friendship between the two men, it came as no surprise. "I had a feeling you would," Whitmore smiled. "And you, Mr. Nimzicki?" The tall, brooding man replied without hesitation. NSC directives require that the Secretary of Defense make himself available to the President at all times. Then, after a beat, he tried changing tones. "It's my job to stay." He tried to make it sound friendly, but it came out like most of the things he said, vaguely menacing. General Gray turned to Whitmore and asked a grave question that had been gnawing away at all of them for the past hour. "Mr. President, what happens if these things do become hostile?" Whitmore thought for a second. "Then God help us."